I have here a set of muzzle devices I've used over the years, except for the 4-prong, which I recently got. I wanted to make an overview of my experience using the BCM Comp Mod 0, the Surefire Warcomp, and the Mini 2, and a little bit of the 4-prong with a 16-inch mid-length gas system on an AR-15. I want to make this video for anyone that was in my position when it came to buying a BCM upper and what muzzle devices to go with. The first muzzle device I used was the BCM Comp Mod 0. It is their A2 style compensator that comes pre-installed with the BCM uppers with an additional $89 to have it pre-installed. The muzzle device is fairly similar to an A2 flash hider, except with the bottom portion where there's no ports being a little bit smaller than a typical A2 flash hider. I would say that this, because of that smaller portion of the non-port area being smaller, it causes the muzzle device to push less downwards compared to an A2 or Warcomp, and creates more of a pushy neutral recoil impulse to the shooter's shoulder. When I first shot the BCM Comp Mod 0, I didn't notice the differences until I moved on to the Warcomp, which was there was a good amount of flash coming out of this device. The noise signature was louder and the concussion was more apparent compared to the next muzzle device, which is the Warcomp. The Surefire 3-prong Warcomp. This is a flash hider compensator hybrid designed to direct the ports in a manner that reduces muzzle rise. You can time these ports in a way that can create a different recoil impulse. I originally timed it for the right-handed shooters, and instead of a typical recoil pattern going up in the right, it actually went down in the left because those ports were pointed in a manner that pushed the gas in that direction. So I instead retimed it for a neutral position, and I found that the Warcomp ended up being a very fancy A2 flash hider. The gun pushes pretty aggressively downwards in a way that is, in my opinion, not as ideal as a typical flash hider or a typical 3-prong or 4-prong flash hider where it goes up instead. The ports can cause an issue whenever you are braced against a barricade with no support structure under the barricade, which what I'm talking about is if you are pushing the gun against a port using a light, or you don't have a hand under the rail, end up having to rebuild that position. When using the Warcomp with a Surefire suppressor, I find it to be a very okay and doable experience. It's not as impossible as people make it out to be. I've shot many rounds out of the Surefire with a Warcomp attached to it, but I have experienced negatives with using the Warcomp with a Mini 2. I know this is a very well-spoken issue about, but I'll just go over my experience as another account of this combo. So the reason why the Warcomp is not an ideal host for the Surefire suppressors is because it lacks labyrinth seals on the device. The noise signature is a little bit louder compared to the 4-prong. The suppressor will throw soot and carbon onto your hand. The last thing I want to cover when it comes to the Warcomp with a Mini 2 is lots of people say it carbon locks, and it definitely can carbon lock. You can avoid this issue by just taking the suppressor off before shooting a crap load of rounds out of it. But if you're going to leave that suppressor on for a long period of time, I think with any of the muzzle devices they will carbon lock pretty badly, but the Warcomp is probably worse at that. I want to go over the Mini 2 Surefire suppressor. This is a pretty cool suppressor. I've really enjoyed using this. I love the locking system on it. It is fairly easy to take the suppressor off the muzzle devices. I am a pretty big believer in shooting unsuppressed and suppressed, so the Surefire is perfect for that. The Surefire, what sucks about it though is that it's pretty heavy. That's a pretty common thing that people talk about. The weight is pretty noticeable, especially at the end of the gun, and it's fairly gassy. The gas tends to hit my nose and eyes, and if I'm shooting a lot indoors, it can get pretty, not unbearable, but it's not the greatest experience. The setup I use now for my rifle is a H2 buffer with a carbine spring. Before I was using a carbine buffer and it was pretty overgassed, and now the suppressor is still overgassed, but it's a lot more manageable and not a problem. The Mini 2 has a pretty good return to zero. I want to say that I have not done any crazy experimenting with the return to zero, other than the fact that every time I've pointed the gun in at 100 yards or more, the zero has been consistent and I've not lost zero, taking it on and off. With a 100-yard zero on the suppressor, if you take it off the suppressor, it almost turns that zero into a 50-yard zero because of the barrel not being weighted down anymore, causing a shift going upwards. So whenever I shoot unsuppressed, the rounds land in a similar spot high as if it was a 50-yard zero. The last muzzle device I want to go over is the one that I recently got, which is the Surefire 4-prong flash hider. This is pretty similar to the Warcomp, except it's actually got the proper seals on it, and it's 4 prongs instead of 3. It doesn't have the ports, because that's not what it is. It's just a flash hider. The reason why I went with the 4-prong instead of the 3-prong flash hider is that a guy I follow on Instagram, Tony Mazza, he is a GM in USPSA and a very good shooter in PCSL. At one point shot with the 4-prong flash hider and noted that the 4-prong has a easier time timing it, where the recoil pattern can go straight up and down compared to an up and to the right. From my little experience, might I add, shooting the 4-prong flash hider, I can say I've noticed the same thing as well, where the 4-prong is a pretty pushy, it pushes and goes straight up almost. With the 4-prong and the suppressor, I've noted that the suppressor is actually gassier with the 4-prong compared to the Warcomp, and that's because the Warcomp is leaking gases out from the back instead of bringing it all the way through and into the shooter's face. One thing that I forgot to note about the 3-prong muzzle devices is that they do have a ring to them. So whether you rack the bolt, fire the trigger, or shoot, you're going to hear a little bit of a ring. I don't care about it. Some people do, but I don't really find it a big issue. So here's the sound of it. You can hear it a little bit while shooting, but I wouldn't say it's like, oh my god, this is the worst thing ever. With the Warcomp, you can kind of hear it. I think over time when you shoot it, the ringing gets less worse than than brand new, so it'll fill up with carbon and the ring won't be as bad. Now there is a plethora of different muzzle devices on the market, but this video is more targeted towards someone that might be getting a BCM upper and is trying to figure out what muzzle device they might want if they're going to go down the Surefire line of suppressors. I would say if I was going to do this again, I would not buy the BCM. Well, let me say this. If I were to focus on flash reduction and just getting into the game, I would just go with a A2 flash hider. I would skip the BCM Comp Mod 0, as it's going to be pretty flashy, pretty concussive, and loud, and just go with the A2 flash hider. It's going to have that downward recoil impulse, but you are getting it for free, and it's something that you can start with. I would skip the Warcomp. This muzzle device, a lot of people recommend it if you're not going to shoot suppressed. I wouldn't recommend it at all unless you like that downward recoil impulse, which in my opinion leads to unideal hits as you are pushing the gun downwards. If you're going for vitals or in a competition scenario, you're more likely to yield better hits on target with a upward motions instead of a downward motion. The other issue is that you're putting more input into the gun by having to slightly lift it up as the gun is being pushed down instead of the gun returning and letting gravity do the work there. So that is my experience with these muzzle devices. I wanted to make this video for anyone that was going to be in my situation so they don't have to go through the hoops and hurdles of using a muzzle device they're not really satisfied with. And I hope that this was helpful. I hope you have a great day.